My mother-in-law keeps correcting how I raise my kids in front of them, and now I'm the bad guy. I need to vent and get some perspective because I'm honestly at the point where I might ban my mother-in-law from our house permanently, and my husband thinks I'm overreacting. I'm 32F, married to David, 34M, for 8 years. We have 3 kids, Sophie, 7, Marcus, 5, and baby Lily, 18 months. David's mother, Carol, 61F, has always been involved. When we first got married, I thought it was sweet how close David was with his mom. She'd call him every day, give advice about everything from our finances to what we should have for dinner, and she always had opinions about how we should run our household. I figured it came from a place of love and that she'd back off once we found our rhythm as a couple. I was wrong. When Sophie was born, Carol immediately positioned herself as the expert. She'd raised 4 children, including David, so clearly she knew better than me about everything baby-related. At first, I was actually grateful for the help. As a new mom, I was overwhelmed and sleep-deprived, and Carol seemed confident and knowledgeable. But looking back now, I can see that's when the pattern started. Carol would suggest things in a way that wasn't really a suggestion. She'd say things like, "Oh, honey, you're holding her wrong. Here, let Grandma show you the right way." Or, "Sweetie, you can't let her cry like that. You're going to damage her psychologically." In my day, we knew how to soothe babies properly. When I tried to explain that I'd read different advice or that our pediatrician had recommended something else, Carol would smile condescendingly and say, "Well, I raised for healthy children, so I think I know what works." She'd often add something like, "These new parenting trends come and go, but mother's intuition and experience never fail." David always backed his mother up. He'd say she was just trying to help, and that I should appreciate having someone so experienced willing to share her knowledge. When I tried to express that her help felt more like criticism, he'd accuse me of being ungrateful or oversensitive. As Sophie got older, Carol's interventions became more problematic. She'd give Sophie snacks right before dinner after I'd specifically said no treats until after she ate her vegetables. When I'd address it, Carol would say, "Oh, a little snack never hurt anyone. She's a growing girl." Then she'd turn to Sophie and say, "Grandma understands that little girls get hungry. Don't you, sweetheart?" She'd let Sophie stay up past bedtime when she babysat, claiming that bedtimes are more like suggestions and that she didn't want to waste precious grandma time. When Sophie would come home overtired and cranky, Carol would act like I was being rigid and mean for having a bedtime routine at all. The worst part was that Carol would do these things right in front of me, in my own home, and then act like I was the unreasonable one when I tried to maintain consistency with the rules David and I had established. When Marcus was born, I hoped things might improve. I was more confident as a mother by then and thought I'd be better at setting boundaries. Instead, Carol seemed to double down on her approach, and now she had 2 kids to correct me about. She'd tell Marcus he didn't have to eat his vegetables if he didn't want to, right after I'd spent 20 minutes trying to encourage him to try them. She'd say things like, "Grandma thinks you're perfect just the way you are. You don't have to eat anything that makes you upset." She'd give both kids candy and sugary drinks throughout the day, despite my clear rules about limiting sugar. When I'd intervene, she'd say, "Life is too short not to enjoy treats. Kids should be kids." Then she'd stage whisper to Sophie and Marcus, "Mommy worries too much, doesn't she?" But it wasn't just about food and treats. Carol would undermine my authority on everything. If I told the kids they needed to clean up their toys before getting new ones out, Carol would jump in and say, "Oh, leave the toys out. That's what kids do. They play. We can clean up later." Then she'd help them get out even more toys, creating chaos in our playroom. If I tried to enforce consequences for misbehavior, Carol would intervene with, Now, they didn't mean any harm. Let Grandma handle this." She'd then give the kids hugs and tell them they were just being spirited or showing their personalities. When Sophie started kindergarten, the problems escalated dramatically. Sophie began challenging every rule and boundary at home, saying things like, "But Grandma says I don't have to," or "Grandma told me that rule is silly." I tried talking to David about it multiple times, but he continued to defend his mother. He'd say things like, "She's just being a loving grandmother," or you're reading too much into it, or she raised me and my siblings just fine, so maybe you should listen to her advice. The breaking point came last summer when Lily was about 6 months old. We were having a family barbecue at our house, and I was struggling to get Lily down for her nap. She was overtired and fussy, and I was following our established routine. Quiet room, white noise, blackout curtains, and letting her settle herself to sleep. Carol burst into the nursery after about 5 minutes of Lily crying and scooped her up, saying loudly, "Oh, my poor grandbaby. Mommy is being mean, making you cry like that. Grandma's here now." I was mortified and frustrated. I explained that we were sleep training and that Lily needed to learn to self-soothe, but Carol waved me off. "Sleep training is cruel," she announced. "Babies need comfort and love, not rigid schedules." She carried Lily outside to the party, where Lily became completely overstimulated by all the noise and people. She was cranky for the rest of the evening and had trouble sleeping for the next 3 nights because her routine was completely disrupted. When I tried to explain to the family why I was upset, Carol loudly proclaimed, "Some people care more about schedules than about their baby's emotional needs." Several family members nodded sympathetically with her, and I felt like the villain for wanting to stick to a routine that had been working well for us. That night, I had a serious conversation with David. I told him that his mother's constant undermining was affecting our children's behavior and my confidence as a mother. I said I felt like I was being turned into the mean parent, while she got to be the fun grandma who never enforced any rules. David's response was to tell me I was being dramatic and territorial. He said his mom just had a different parenting style and that the kids could benefit from seeing different approaches. He suggested that maybe I was being too rigid and that I should pick my battles better. I realized then that David couldn't see the problem because he'd been raised by Carol. To him, her behavior was normal. He'd grown up with a mother who overruled other authority figures and believed she knew best in every situation, so he didn't understand why I found it problematic. Over the next few months, I tried a different approach. Instead of going to David first, I started addressing Carol directly when she undermined me. I'd say things like, "Carol, I need you to support the rules David and I have established for our children, or please don't give them snacks right now. We're about to have dinner." Carol's response was to become passive-aggressive and start playing the victim. She'd sigh heavily and say things like, "Well, I guess I don't know anything about children, even though I raised 4 of them successfully." Or she'd make comments like, "I'm just trying to help, but some people don't appreciate family support." She'd also started making subtle digs about my parenting in front of other family members. At David's brother's birthday party, she loudly said, "I don't know why some parents have to make everything so complicated. We just loved our children and let them be kids, and they all turned out fine." When Sophie had a meltdown at that same party because she was overtired, Carol had insisted she didn't need a nap earlier. Carol said, "Poor thing is probably just stressed. Kids can sense tension, you know." The implication was clear. I was creating a stressful environment that was affecting my daughter. The situation reached a crisis point this past fall. Sophie had started first grade and was struggling with the transition. She was having behavioral issues at school, refusing to follow directions, talking back to teachers, and having meltdowns when she didn't get her way. During a parent-teacher conference, Sophie's teacher, Mrs. Henderson, asked about consistency between home and school rules. She said Sophie often responded to redirection by saying things like, "My grandma says I don't have to do things I don't want to do," or "My grandma says grown-ups are too mean to kids." Mrs. Henderson gently suggested that there might be mixed messages at home about authority and expectations. She said Sophie seemed confused about whether rules applied to her and often tested boundaries by referencing what her grandmother had told her. I was mortified. I realized that Carol's undermining wasn't just affecting our family dynamics, it was impacting Sophie's ability to function in school and respect authority figures outside our home. That evening, I sat down with David and showed him the notes from the parent-teacher conference. I explained that our daughter was struggling academically and socially because she'd learned from his mother that rules were optional and that she could appeal to different adults until she got the answer she wanted. David was finally starting to see the bigger picture, but his solution was to ask me to have a gentle conversation with his mother about being more supportive. He still didn't want to confront her directly or set firm boundaries. I decided to take matters into my own hands. The next time Carol was at our house and undermined a rule, I addressed it immediately and firmly. Marcus had hit Sophie during a disagreement over a toy, and I put him in timeout as we always did for aggressive behavior. Carol immediately jumped in with, "Oh, he's just frustrated. He doesn't understand how to express his feelings yet. Come here, sweetie. Grandma will help you feel better." I stepped between her and Marcus and said, "Carol, Marcus is in timeout for hitting his sister. I need you to let him serve his consequence so he can learn that hitting isn't acceptable." Carol's face went red. "He's just a baby. You're being too harsh. This is ridiculous." I stayed calm but firm. He's 5 years old, and he needs to learn appropriate behavior. Please don't interfere with the discipline David and I have decided on. Carol turned to Marcus and said, "Grandma thinks you're a good boy who just made a mistake. Sometimes grown-ups forget what it's like to be little." That's when I lost it. "Carol, stop. You're undermining my authority as his mother, and you're confusing him about expectations. Either support the rules in our home, or don't be here when I'm parenting." Carol gasped like I'd slapped her. "How dare you speak to me that way? I'm his grandmother, and I have every right to show him love and compassion when his own mother is being cruel." David walked in during this exchange and immediately asked what was happening. Carol burst into tears and said, "Your wife is trying to keep me from my grandchildren. She's being hostile and unreasonable, and I was just trying to help." David looked at me expectantly, waiting for me to apologize or back down. Instead, I explained exactly what had happened and stood by my position. I said that Carol needed to support our parenting decisions or limit her visits to times when we weren't actively dealing with behavior issues. David was caught in the middle and handled it poorly. He suggested that maybe we could compromise. Carol could express her opinions, but she'd try to do it more privately, and I would try to be more flexible about different approaches to parenting. This compromise satisfied no one and fixed nothing. Carol continued to undermine me, just more subtly. She'd make faces or shake her head when I enforced rules, so the kids could see her disapproval even when she didn't voice it. She'd wait until I left the room to give them treats or let them break rules, then swear them to secrecy with, "This will be our little secret from Mommy." The kids began lying to me about things Carol had allowed them to do. Sophie started saying, "Grandma said it was okay," about things that had clearly happened when I wasn't around. Marcus began asking, "Can I ask Grandma instead?" Whenever I said no to something, I felt like I was losing control of my own household and my own children. The kids were becoming manipulative, playing adults against each other, and learning that rules were negotiable if you found the right person to ask. Things came to a head during Thanksgiving. We were hosting David's entire family, including Carol. I'd spent weeks preparing and was already stressed about managing the meal, the house, and 3 kids during a big family gathering. Carol arrived early to help, but immediately started criticizing my preparations. She rearranged my kitchen setup, claiming I was doing things the hard way. She changed the temperature on the turkey, saying I was going to dry it out. She started preparing side dishes differently than I'd planned, insisting her recipes were better. When I asked her to please let me handle the cooking since I'd been planning the meal for weeks, she said, "Oh, honey, you're already so stressed. Let someone with experience take over the hard parts." But the real explosion happened later in the day. All the kids were running around playing, and the noise level was getting high. I asked Sophie and Marcus to take their games to the playroom so the adults could visit more comfortably. Carol immediately said, "Oh, let them play. It's a family gathering. Kids should be part of the celebration." She then suggested the kids play a loud, energetic game right in the living room where everyone was trying to talk. I politely but firmly redirected the kids to the playroom, explaining that they could continue playing but needed to give the adults some space. Carol followed them and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Grandma thinks kids should be allowed to be kids in their own home. Sometimes grown-ups forget how to have fun." I felt humiliated in front of David's entire family. Several relatives chuckled and made comments about how Carol really understood children and how lucky the kids were to have such a fun grandmother. Later, when I was trying to get Lily down for her nap, she was fussy because she was overstimulated from all the activity. Carol burst into the nursery again and said, "Poor baby. All this stress isn't good for her. Let Grandma calm her down." Before I could stop her, Carol had picked up Lily and was walking her around the house, showing her off to relatives and keeping her awake when she desperately needed sleep. Every time I tried to take Lily back, Carol would say things like, "Just a few more minutes with Grandma," or "She's fine. Look how happy she is." Lily ended up missing her nap entirely and was a disaster for the rest of the day. She was crying and clingy, which made it impossible for me to enjoy the dinner I'd spent weeks preparing. That evening, after everyone left, I had a complete breakdown. I told David that I couldn't continue living this way, that his mother was sabotaging my relationship with our children and making me feel like a failure as a mother. I said I felt like Carol was deliberately trying to position herself as the good guy, while making me look like the uptight, mean parent. I explained that our kids were learning to disrespect authority and manipulate situations because they'd learned from Carol that rules were optional and that they could always find an adult who would give them what they wanted. David finally admitted that he could see how his mother's behavior was problematic, but he said he didn't know how to address it without causing a family crisis. Carol was the matriarch of the family, and challenging her would affect his relationships with his siblings and extended family. I told him that our marriage and our children's well-being were more important than keeping peace with his mother. I said that if he couldn't set boundaries with Carol, I would have to do it myself, and it might not go smoothly. David asked me to give him a chance to talk to his mother first. He said he'd explain that we needed her to support our parenting decisions and that undermining us was affecting the children negatively. The conversation David had with Carol was a disaster. She cried and said she felt like she was being pushed out of her grandchildren's lives. She claimed she was just trying to show them love and that she couldn't understand why that was a problem. She said she felt like I didn't appreciate her help and that maybe she should just stay away if her presence was so unwelcome. David came home feeling guilty and conflicted. Carol had made him feel like we were being unreasonable and cruel to an older woman who just wanted to love her grandchildren. But instead of backing down, Carol escalated her behavior. She started making comments about how some people were too controlling and didn't understand that children needed unconditional love. She'd make these comments in front of the kids, who were starting to understand that there was tension between mommy and grandma. The final straw came last month. I had to work late unexpectedly, and David asked Carol to pick up Sophie and Marcus from school and watch them until we got home. When I arrived at 7 p.m., I found chaos. Carol had taken the kids to McDonald's for dinner, despite knowing that we had groceries at home and that I'd planned to make their favorite meal that night. She'd let them order whatever they wanted, including large sodas and multiple desserts. The kids were bouncing off the walls from sugar, and were going to be up way past bedtime. When I asked Carol why she hadn't fed them the dinner I'd left instructions for, she said, "They wanted McDonald's, and I thought they deserved a treat for being good at school." But worse than the dinner situation was what I found when I went to put their school backpacks away. Sophie's homework folder was empty, and when I asked her about it, she said Grandma told her homework wasn't important and that she should just play instead. Marcus's reading log showed that no one had read with him, even though he was supposed to read for 20 minutes every day as part of his kindergarten requirements. When I asked Carol about it, she said, "He's only 5. He shouldn't have homework pressure at his age." I told him Grandma thinks he's smart enough already. I was furious. Carol had sabotaged their entire evening routine and their school responsibilities. When I tried to get them to complete their homework before bed, they both had meltdowns because they were overtired and overstimulated. Sophie cried and said, "Grandma said I didn't have to do homework. Grandma said you're too mean about school stuff." Marcus refused to read with me, saying, "Grandma said reading time is stupid." It took me over an hour to get them calmed down and complete even half of their homework. They were exhausted and cranky, and I felt like the worst mother in the world for enforcing basic school requirements that Carol had dismissed as unimportant. That night, I told David that Carol was no longer allowed to babysit the children unsupervised. I said she could visit and spend time with them, but only when David or I was present to ensure that our rules and routines were followed. David initially resisted, saying I was being extreme and that we needed Carol's help with childcare. But when he saw how the kids' behavior had deteriorated and how behind they were getting with school responsibilities, he started to understand the seriousness of the situation. We had a family meeting with Carol the following weekend. David and I presented a united front and explained that while we appreciated her love for the children, we needed her to support our parenting decisions and household rules. We gave her specific guidelines: no treats without permission, no contradicting consequences we'd given, no dismissing school responsibilities, and no making negative comments about our parenting in front of the children. Carol's reaction was explosive. She accused me of brainwashing David against his own mother. She said I was jealous of her relationship with the children and that I was trying to isolate them from family who truly love them. She claimed that I was too rigid and controlling and that the children were suffering because of my unrealistic expectations. She said she'd raised 4 children successfully without all these modern parenting rules and that David had turned out just fine. Then she said something that revealed everything. These children need at least one adult in their lives who puts their happiness before arbitrary rules. If their own mother won't do it, thank God they have a grandmother who will. That statement showed me that Carol genuinely believed she was rescuing our children from my parenting. In her mind, she wasn't undermining us. She was providing necessary balance to what she saw as my harmful approach. The meeting ended with Carol storming out, saying she wouldn't be back until we came to our senses and started appreciating her contributions to the family. For 2 weeks, we had blissful peace. The kids asked about Grandma a few times, but they adjusted quickly to consistent rules and expectations. Sophie's behavior at school improved dramatically when she wasn't getting mixed messages about authority. Marcus started completing his homework without arguments when he realized there was no one to appeal to for a different answer. But the peace didn't last. Carol started calling the kids directly, telling them she missed them and asking if Mommy and Daddy were being mean. She'd promised them special treats and fun activities if they could convince us to let her visit. She also began a campaign with David's extended family, painting herself as the victim of an unreasonable daughter-in-law who was keeping her from her beloved grandchildren. She shared selective details about our conflicts, making it sound like I was forbidding normal grandmother activities out of spite. David started getting pressure from his siblings and his father to work things out with Carol. They suggested that maybe I was overreacting and that family harmony was more important than perfect parenting consistency. The pressure got to David, and he started questioning whether we were being too harsh. He pointed out that Carol really did love the children and that maybe we could find ways to work with her rather than shutting her out. Last week, David suggested that we invite Carol for Christmas morning with the understanding that she'd follow our guidelines. He said she'd promised to be more respectful of our rules and that the holidays were important for family unity. I'm torn because I can see that David is struggling with the family pressure and I don't want our marriage to suffer because of this conflict. But I also know that Carol hasn't really changed. She's just saying what David wants to hear, so she can regain access to the children. I'm worried that if we let her back into our lives without clear consequences for her past behavior, she'll interpret it as validation that her approach was right all along. I'm afraid she'll go back to undermining us, but more carefully and subtly. At the same time, I can see that the kids miss their grandmother, and I don't want to be responsible for permanently damaging those relationships. I know that Carol does love them, even if her way of showing it is problematic. David thinks I'm being unforgiving and that I should give his mother another chance for the sake of family peace. He says that Christmas is about forgiveness and that keeping Carol away during the holidays sends the wrong message to our children about family values. But I'm terrified that allowing her back will undo all the progress we've made with the kids' behavior and our family dynamics. I'm worried that Carol will see any compromise as a victory and will go back to her old patterns of undermining and manipulation. I also realize that this conflict has revealed some deeper issues in my marriage. David's loyalty to his mother runs so deep that he struggles to prioritize our nuclear family's needs when they conflict with her wishes. I'm not sure he'll ever be able to fully support me against her if she continues to cause problems. So here I am, facing Christmas and wondering whether to stand firm on the boundaries we've established or to give Carol another chance for the sake of family harmony. I don't know if I'm being too rigid or if I'm protecting my children from a toxic dynamic that will harm them in the long run. What would you do? Am I wrong to keep Carol away from the kids during the holidays, or should I trust that she'll respect our boundaries this time? How do I balance being a good daughter-in-law with being a good mother to my own children? I feel like I'm fighting a battle I can't win, no matter what choice I make.